Hi, everyone, and welcome to AIADA's AutoTalk. I'm your host, Rachel Soleimani. Just a reminder that anyone who is registered for today's program will be receiving a copy by the end of this week. Joining us today, we have Doug Austin, founder of StrategicSource. Doug, you always have some great and creative information for us, so I'll let you take it away.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're here today. The topic of today's webinar is the $1 million advantage of a consistent purchasing focus. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges dealers are having today with slower sales and certainly improving profitability. We're going to look back at a number of other industries and how they have been successful with purchasing. And it's really my objective today to try to demonstrate to you through data and experience that a consistent purchasing focus rather than a kind of a project short-term focus is really going to pay off for your dealership. So let's get started. Um, uh, First of all, let me make a couple of comments and then ask a question. Where do you really want to be as a dealership? We know that 100% of the dealerships are going to manage supply and service expenses today. We know that 5% of the dealership groups out there today have a purchasing department. That's a competitive advantage for them. We also know that 100% of the dealerships are going to be managing expenses for the life of the business. So, I mean, there's about 100 expense categories out there, repetitive supplies and services that you're going to need, and that's not going to go away. So the question really is, how effective do you want to be in expense management? Do you want to be below average, average, or best in class? And I'm hoping that by the end of this, we can demonstrate some metrics here that you will choose to be aspire to be best in class as well. We're going to talk about challenges, some dealership facts, opportunities to drive profit, what to do next, and support available from StrategicSource. So some of the dealership challenges today: smart dealers want to be more profitable. Solution is, well, let's sell more cars or trucks. But selling cars doesn't necessarily solve a ongoing management issue. Managing expenses does. You're going to have to do that for the life of your business. We know that dealers spend 25% too much on supplies and services. We started in the dealer space in the year 2000. Our lowest savings at the end of the year when we have calculated has been 21%. Our highest is most recently 33%, which is telling us that dealers are spending at least 25% too much on services and supplies. We also know that dealers want to keep more of their money. That's why we're here. So some facts you should know. There's about 144 expense categories out there today that you can spend your money in, from DMS to hazardous waste to life insurance to floor plan financing to office supplies. We know the dealers will spend roughly 5% of sales. So if you're a $100 million group, you're going to spend $5 million on those 144 categories. We also know that you're going to overspend by 25%. That's the number I referred to earlier, when you don't have a purchasing department in place. We know that decentralized purchasing, meaning not having a purchasing department, is in place today with 95% of the dealers. That means that locations have the freedom to select their own suppliers, put their own deals together, their own pricing, so forth and so on. That's where the rub is. That's where the inefficiencies come out, and what has ended up costing dealers 25% of their spend. Let's talk a little bit about U.S. industry. The reality is 75% of businesses today with $100 million in sales in revenue have purchasing departments. And how does purchasing work in those businesses? Well, they provide spend visibility and planning. They do quoting and analysis. They make sure the supplier base is optimized. They manage objectives, they create objectives, manage those, and the KPIs. They do supplier compliance audits and they manage contracts. That's what a typical purchasing department will do. So most businesses realize that that purchasing supplies and services is really a core function. It is not a project. Dealership reality is that 95% of dealers do not have a purchasing department. I said that earlier. Purchasing is decentralized. Managers buy supplies and services really on a part time basis. They do this in addition to their other primary duties. There's limited benchmarking going on. Locations operate independently. That's why the supply bases are so large. Quoting is rare. Accounting, operations, and office managers all buy services and supplies, but ultimately nobody owns purchasing responsibilities as a traditional organization would. So dealerships have a structural organization opportunity here, and hopefully I can lead you to that conclusion today. There's really 8 challenges, purchasing challenges that dealerships face. One is they're decentralized. There's a lot of redundancies, loss of purchasing leverage. Um, they lack spend visibility. They're unsure where to prioritize their purchasing efforts. They pick out the easy ones. They say, Steve, go work on office supplies, and Mary, go work on uniforms, and come back and get me 10% savings. And Steve and Mary go out and do that. But there's really not a priority in terms of where are the big spend categories at. Number 3, inconsistent sourcing. Well, we know that's true because dealers tend to overpay by 25% for supplies and services. There's a large supplier base. If you've got 100 or let's just call it 100 expense categories that you're spending money in routinely, yet you have 500 suppliers, which is not uncommon. You've got a 5-to-1 ratio. Your supply base is too large, and with that, you're losing leverage and creating a lot of additional expense that you don't need to have. There's really no strategy, policies, and controls. So, kind of an inconsistent approach, and that always equals risk. Most dealers will lack any contract management. Why? Because the contracts are usually spread among the dealership. So the service manager, parts, controller, CFO, everybody seems to have contracts, but nobody's tracking, managing those contracts and preventing auto renewals. There's really no supplier compliance audits to see if suppliers are billing you at the right rate. And if they are billing you incorrectly, are we capturing those dollars? So the result is increased costs. And then lastly, ineffective management reviews. If we don't have the right metrics and KPIs in place, we can't manage this world we call procurement, and the large expenditures that we're making. So the takeaway here is your organization will buy supplies and services for the life of your business. The question is, are you going to manage it well, or are you going to give it kind of infrequent attention, as goes on in many of the dealerships today? I mentioned before the dealers spend 5% of their sales on supplies and services. Um, and we talked about that 100 million in sales. That means 5 million in expenditures on supplies and services, and you're overspending by 25%. So that means you're losing about 1.25 million annually. You look at that over 3 years, 3.75 million. What could you be doing with those kind of additional profits? But the scope of the category responsibility is quite large. If you look at this eye chart, and I apologize for it, but the reality is you're spending money in 72 general categories, from advertising to uniforms and laundry. Every business out here today, whether it's a manufacturer, a church, a city, a retail organization, is likely going to spend money in those 72 categories. Most dealerships own their own facilities, so you have another 16 expense categories there. And of course, auto dealers have got categories of expense unique to them. There's another 56 there. So that's how we get to 144. Again, most dealers are spending money in roughly 100 categories out of that 144, but those are repetitive purchases. So, of the 144 expense categories, the question I would ask you is how many did you actually quote last year? I would hope the answer would be 15 to 20, and you're cycling through those categories every year. The following year, you're doing a different 15 to 20, but you should be doing a large portion of those every year to stay on top of competitive pricing and market changes. Inconsistent, non-competitive supplier pricing. When everybody buys their own stuff, when everybody's in charge, nobody's in charge. This is an actual example of a 4-location group, and I just pulled out brake clean, credit bureaus, uniform shirts, and merchant processing. Hardly any of them are any of the prices are the same. They're all different. And why? Well, it's because different people were negotiating the pricing and didn't have a benchmark to say what was a good price and what was a non-competitive price. So poor pricing, inconsistent pricing, poor use of leverage. These prices really are not auditable unless they're locked in for any length of time. So again, this is pretty consistent with what happens in a multi-store group without a purchasing department. So takeaway, part-time project-oriented purchasing is really costing your dealership 25% of your spend. Um, and there's an opportunity here to get that fixed. Why supplier costs drift? Why do they increase over time? Well, here's the reasons primarily for price increases in dealerships. One is the part-time purchasing effort that goes on. Two, contracts auto renew, oftentimes with little management or oversight. Three, suppliers increase prices. They'll increase prices, and if you pay that invoice without contesting that price increase, it's really considered offer and acceptance. If you've acted on it, you've just taken the hit, and chances are you're going to see additional price increases after that. Number four, there's really no market benchmarking. So, if you don't benchmark and watch your prices, they will increase. Number five, there's too many suppliers. There's too many suppliers to audit and to manage and to keep track of. Um, so we tend to overlook a lot of price increases. Number six, supplier relationships that have been going on for years. There's no challenge. I would make the reference to the Reagan quote of years ago. You may trust your supplier partner, and you probably should, but trust but verify. Verify that their prices are market driven, they're competitive, and it's advantageous for you to use them. And number seven, oftentimes dealers do little or no supplier audits at all. You may agree that $1 for that pen is a good price, but if you don't audit frequently or at all, you're likely to be surprised when you do finally end up with an audit. So the takeaway here, purchasing again is not a project, but it does require a new strategy. The benchmark question, how do we know when we have a competitive price? Well, there's really a few ways to do that. And there's one best approach, and I'll talk about that as well. But a lot of dealers just accept the supplier's quoted price. The supplier says, look, Mary, this is a killer price. You're getting the best price I can offer, and the buyer, accepts that explanation and just goes on their merry way. A lot of dealers do nothing, or they just guess. I remember a dealer in Colorado a few years ago that told me they had a killer price on uniforms. He just got done negotiating it. When we checked it against our benchmark, it was 85% off. That doesn't make us the greatest negotiators in the world, but what it does say is that this gentleman, thought he was a grinder and negotiated what he thought was a competitive price, but he didn't have anything to benchmark that again. He didn't know what truth was. So yeah, number three, depend on your superior negotiation skills, that grinder mindset. That doesn't work out very well. You may be um, great at selling cars because you understand the vehicle market, but if you're not in the supply and service space every day, chances are you don't know what truth is there. Number four, benchmark prices with friendly non-competitors. 20 groups would be a great place for you to benchmark your uniform pricing or your telecom or your DMS. That would be a wonderful opportunity to do that. But number five is really the best. That means develop an RFQ, a request for quote, go out for quote with 3 to 4 both qualified and interested suppliers, and you're going to find truth in the marketplace real quick. You're going to find pricing all over the map. And that doesn't suggest that you should always pick the least expensive supplier, but you will know if you run an effective quote what the marketplace is telling you and what a competitive price is. So, competitive quotes really represent truth in the marketplace. That's the best place to find out what the pricing should be for that supplier service. So what is the dealership opportunity? Where's the next 300, $500,000 in profit going to come from? Well, let me tell you that we know from data, published public data out there, the dealerships operate on pretty thin margins, between 2 and 4%, and I've just used 3% as a kind of a middle of the road approach here. But if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, if you generate $100,000 in cost savings, if you're a 3% dealer, that's equivalent to selling $3.3 million in cars at today's rates. If you generate $1 million in cost savings, again, assuming you're operating at a 3% margin, well, that's equivalent to selling 33 million in cars. How tough would it be to get $1 million in costs out of your business? It's probably not that difficult, especially if you're a larger group with sales of 100 million a year. Going after $1 million in cost savings is not that difficult. So the point is here that cost savings can add bottom line profits oftentimes faster than sales can. I don't know about your dealership, but generating $33 million in new sales might take a while. Um, and what I'm suggesting here is that generating cost savings of that equivalent profit margin contribution can be a lot quicker. So what does professional purchasing look like? If we were to build a purchasing department in a dealership, what would they do? Well, they would certainly, if they were good at what they did, they would provide spend visibility on an annual basis so that you could plan your expense categories. You would understand what you're spending in those 144 categories annually, how many suppliers you have in each, and really what the opportunities might be. You would, with a professional purchasing group, you would be doing continuous quoting on those categories. You would be doing price benchmarking so that you knew what a good price was. You would have contract management in place. You would do supplier compliance audits to prevent overcharges. And certainly, any well managed department or organization is going to have tracking, key performance indicators, and reporting. So the other way to look at this, purchasing department in a dealership can become a profit center, and it's one of the more unusual departments in any organization because if they do a good job and they can reduce the last price paid on that use that pen as an example. If they get that down to 90 cents from a dollar, and you're consuming thousands of those, it's easy to articulate what that cost savings contribution is. So purchasing becomes a profit center and reducing your overspend by 25%. So where the savings are, what are the five most overlooked strategies for new profitability? Certainly, if you look over here, quoting expense categories is number one. That's going to kick off the largest percent of cost savings to your group. Again, 25%. There's a group out there called the Aberdeen Group. They've done a lot of research and said that centralizing procurement will bring significant dollars to your bottom line. Again, our professional purchasing practice has validated that. The next really big opportunity is getting early payment discounts. If you have 140 expense categories, let's assume you have two suppliers for each. You've probably got 280 suppliers. If we can get 2% discount on those invoices for early payment, that's going to throw off cash. If we can then pay those suppliers with a credit card, those same 280, we can generate another 1.5% cash back. There are at least 30 revenue categories that a good purchasing person should be able to bring to your attention for your consideration to generate more top line. And then the fifth opportunity is really in the supplier compliance audits. I don't for a minute think that suppliers are trying to cheat you or harm your business, but mistakes happen, and it's a good idea to audit your invoices that come in, especially the high spend invoices, and audit those folks on a regular basis. So supply and service spend again equals 5% of your sales. I would say that the opportunity then, $100 million dealership with $5 million in spend is not 25%, but when we look at this, about 30%. The 25 and the additional opportunities here, we're probably looking at 30%. Well, 30% of 5 million is $1.5 million. That's annually. If you look at that over 3 years, that's $4.5 million. That's a lot of profit that can, go to pay for new buildings, to buy another dealership, um, to grow your business. So the question really is, can your organization afford to ignore these opportunities? I would hope not, because that 4.5 million is really going into your supplier's checking account for them to enjoy rather than for you to enjoy. So large groups really control costs with one centralized purchasing. They control a large amount of dollars under spend, and they use best in class procurement practices. And let me just touch on that for a second because it's important to understand. Starting at 12 o'clock, again, a good purchasing department is going to develop annual spend. They're going to develop a sourcing plan and business objectives. At 1 o'clock here, they're going to schedule those category for sourcing. They're going to go out and get competitive pricing for supplies and services. They're going to help, excuse me, narrow and optimize that supply base. They're going to make sure that policies, controls, and processes are in place to mitigate risk. They're going to have contract tracking and management in place. There'll be supplier and internal audits, compliance audits going on, meaning are suppliers charging the right price? Are my employees using the right suppliers? Because oftentimes you get cowboys out here that go off on their own and use a supplier that's a friend of theirs and not the designated supplier, and that can't go on either. And then lastly, are we doing regular and efficient tracking, reporting, and management? If all of those practices are in place, you have best-in-class procurement, and that's what a purchasing department, a highly effective purchasing department, should bring to your organization. So let's just look at um, what are the costs and opportunities with a part-time purchasing group. I took a 10-year look, 2020 to 2029. $5 million in spend. Let's assume that you're a group that just addresses 5% of your spend annually, and you were able to generate 8% savings. At the end of 10 years, you're going to throw off $250,000 in savings, but you're going to leave about 11,765,000 that are wasted. On the other hand, if you had a full-time purchasing group again, then now we're looking at they're addressing 80% of your spend annually, and they're achieving 25% savings in that same 10-year period. You're going to pull out about $12 million in cost savings with very little that you've lost. So a full-time, highly effective purchasing department can throw off $12 million in 10 years versus a part-time effort that throws off $250,000. Pretty conservative assumptions, but real bottom line opportunity. So here's an opportunity for you to kind of assess your own purchasing effectiveness and your opportunity. You could take a picture of this slide if you've got your camera available. Plug in your annual sales right here. The calculation should come out 5% of sales. We're assuming that you have 100 expense categories out there that you're working on annually. Plug in what you think your supplier count is. You can get that from your accounts payable department. If you have more than 300, you probably have too many suppliers. Your targeted cost savings in this case should be 25% of spend. That should be a calculation that's produced in this document. So take a look at this. Take a look at the numbers from this simple exercise, and then the questions to ask. What are you going to do? Well, one is do nothing. Leave purchasing decentralized. Leave it as it is. Two, build a internal purchasing department yourself. What's that going to take? Well, it's probably going to take 1 to 2 full-time equivalents. But if you've done a good job hiring those folks, they should pay for themselves on a 2x, 3x, 4x return annually. Or the other opportunity is to hire a purchasing partner, such as StrategicSource, and let us handle that for you. So with the purchasing department, you really go from paying 25% too much to reducing costs by 25%. You're going to miss supplier discounts, and you're going to go to getting new discounts, more cash, from no audits to new supplier audits, new cash, from high pricing to new competitive pricing, from too many suppliers to an optimized, efficient supplier base, new profitability. That's what we're after. So, Strategic Source can assist you in these efforts. We are a pretty good sized group. We're about 45 people today. We've been serving dealerships since 2000. We've supported well over 1,500 dealers. We average 25% cost savings for our clients, actually 33% last year. We reduced supplier bases. We've saved over $1 billion so far. We've got over 150 years of spend experience on our staff. We're considered a trusted partner by our clients. We're Minnesota based, and we're veteran owned. So here's a picture of our team. Actually, tomorrow we've got a new uh, company meeting. Everybody's coming in from out of town today. We'll probably have updated pictures of that. The grass won't be as green yet, but we're hoping for some good weather. And here's a picture of our sourcing team and our client success team. Well, last year we did roughly 3,000 different sourcing projects, so we don't have all the all the answers, but we're pretty good. We're pretty darn competitive. We can help you with a profit improvement program. We can do something as simple as a spend analysis to help you plan. We can help you with a contract tracker, and we have a subscription basis that'll be rolled out soon, subscription platform that is, to provide data so that you can do your own sourcing with our help. But we've got multiple options to reduce costs, save time, improve profits. Ultimately, we help you keep more of the money that you make, and I think that's what we're all in business for: is to be profitable, ongoing, viable businesses. So, um, if you'd like this presentation today, just snap a picture of the QR code. If you want to reach out to us to learn more, again, you can hit that QR code. We've got some information down here. If you want additional information or reach out to talk to somebody, reach out to Chris Austin. He's our Chief Revenue Officer, 612-386-3898, or email Chris at caustin@strategicsource.com. I covered a lot of this pretty darn quick. I hope I was able to make the point that, if you don't have a purchasing department today, you're missing a profit center that can throw off a lot of new um, profit margin to your dealerships that can be significant and material to your business. So good luck to you. And if you've got any questions, give me a holler. Give Chris a holler. Any questions out there?
Doug, thanks for joining us today. If anyone has questions, you can reach out and scan the code there, or you can send them to me and I will pass them along to Doug. Again, you'll all be receiving a copy of this presentation and recording by later this week. To those on the line, join us back here on Tuesday, April 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern as Comply Auto talks dealer fee and ad compliance. To learn more about AIADA, visit aiada.org. Thanks for joining us and have a great day, everyone.